Well, like I said, my name is Erica Boyd, and I was born in California, but I grew up for the first 13 years in New Mexico. And then in 1968, we moved back to California. We had a really great childhood, I like to think. I mean, of course, there were things that happened, you know, like our mother getting divorced when it wasn't chic and things like that. But as a kid, you know, you're not really aware of some of that everlasting effects or whatever, the different things. But we just had a great childhood there. We were exposed to tons of art, and I think that the culture that we grew up in there really formed us as individuals. My sisters and I, like, we were exposed to the American Indians pretty closely. We went to the reservations pretty often, and our parents, we had a lot of, you know, one guy who was really involved with anthropologically through the university and stuff, who did a lot of work with American Indians. And then we had a lot of Spanish friends, you know, and of course, like, our parents, sort of the bohemian and then the professional workers at the University in New Mexico. And it was a really, an enchanted, you know, the land of enchantment is what they call New Mexico. And I feel like, you know, some people feel like it's the same, but I don't feel like it is anymore, you know, so. And moving to Berkeley it took me a long time to realize how much of a change that was for us, because it was like integrated busing, which was kind of hard on us a little bit. I was not bussed out of my neighborhood, but my younger sister was, and I think there was a lot of traumatic stuff there. But it was chaos. I was getting a great education in New Mexico, really, really great. And I just think of some of my classes at it was Garfield, and what became Martin Luther King Junior High. Some of them, I think of the kids literally like swinging from the chandeliers, kind of, and stuff like that. And I was, when I was younger, I called it reverse racism. There was a couple of gals. There was one gal, she just picked on me, you know, and God, there used to be false fire alarms all the time. You know, during class, somebody would pull it. And the one time it was real, I was in a class right near my locker, and we're walking out, and my locker is on fire, you know. And there was this guy who was in my English and literature class, and I thought he was my friend. You know, we had friends still from all walks of life when we moved to Berkeley, and he claimed that it was him, but I never really quite believed him and stuff. And it took me a long time to realize some of those kids probably were a lot older than I were, from being kept back and whatnot, but it was really chaotic. So I made it through 8th grade, and then in the 9th grade, the school system had changed. They were working on one of the campuses. They had 2 campuses that were 9th grade only, and I was supposed to go to this, you know, all the kids were going to one campus because the other one they were working on, and I lasted there about 6 weeks. So I was just in trauma. It was kind of like a war zone, you know. I mean, literally kids bringing guns and knives to school, and here I am taking like yoga and meditation, and it was just a real conundrum. And one day I saw this ad in the paper for a free school, you know, as a new thing in 1969, and of course, it's a free school you pay for. And so this one was starting up in a church. And so my parents decided, oh, fine, that's a great place to go, you know. They let me go there, and it was called Bay High. Our motto actually became Bay High Stays High, you know. And you know, my education there really faltered. I mean, they really tried and stuff. But one of the things we did to make money to support the school was we started making these huge outdoor sound systems. And the first one we made was sold to Santana. So we were making them for these, you know, up and coming big groups. And I was totally into that. I had always been, you know, my first dad was, he did a lot of woodworking. Both my first dad and my first stepdad, they were incredible artists. They could do anything. So there was always a lot of that going on in our house. And And then at times in our life when I was younger and there wasn't like a dad in the house, like I was the one that would put the kit together that got brought home, you know, or mow the lawn and things like that. So I was in my element, building things and, you know, sorting through screws and stuff like that. And I had always been interested in architecture. I was thinking about this morning. It's like with Etch-a-Sketch and whatnot, I used to do houses and floor plans and things like that. So I'll back up. In '67, a year before we moved to Berkeley permanently, we had come out here to visit Blair, that we had known in New Mexico, and our parents had sort of had a clandestine affair a little bit before, and then was becoming more, you know, he had gotten divorced and separated and whatnot, and our mom was divorced from her second husband, and so we came out here to visit, and what we did was we came up, and he had bought land in Whale Gulch. I don't know, I'd have to look, I think about 63 or 65 or something like that. And so we came up and went camping on the property out there. And that was when we met. He already knew Bob and his family. They had mutual friends, Bob McKee, mutual friends in the Bay Area. And some of those friends were actually like relatives of people who had been our neighbors in New Mexico and stuff like that. So it was still this big crowd that we knew from out there that had also came out here. And that their connection was kind of through San Francisco State and a couple other people there. And so we came up and we went camping and met all the McKees. And so that was my first exposure here. I was 12, and you know, it was sort of like another land of enchantment almost. It was nothing out in the Gulch really. People were just starting to build their houses and stuff. And then the next year when we moved to Berkeley permanently in 1968, and our parents got married, we took a honeymoon trip down the Rogue River, and we took the trip with the McKees. So it was their family and our family, and we had a gal who was like our, you know, did childcare for us and stuff like that in Berkeley. We took her kids with us, and that was everybody had a great time on that trip. And we came here again at that time, you know. So it's just sort of my initial exposure to, that's northern Mendocino, I mean, and southern Humboldt. And so then I go into this school, in the spring of had to be the spring of 1970 by then. We came up here, we came up here for a camping trip. And by this time, Bob had built a house on our property in the Gulch, so we were camping there and whatnot. And my idea, I don't know where I just lobbed onto the idea that I wanted to move to the country and build a house, you know, build a cabin and whatnot. So I was 15 years old, and as my dad put it, one day he was in the shower where he did his best thinking and whatnot, and he just was like, well, why not? Excuse me, you know. So I had a boyfriend who was 22, and he had actually grown up over in High-and-Palm. So he had a lot of country experience and whatnot like that. And, you know, and a few days before my 15th birthday, we ended up moving. We stayed in the house for a while because we had a big piece of property that we owned with partners. And we had to wait for a road to get built where Bob had decided was a good place to build the cabin, you know. And not the best place on our property to put the cabin necessarily. It was like down in the hole sort of and whatnot. And I later thought, well, I wonder if that's because he didn't think we were really going to last here or something like that, you know. And I don't know what my dad's motive was in buying this piece of property, really, you know. He was just, like I said, a geographer and always loved, you know, the out-of-the-way place. He was the guy that was he used to be called Blue Highways, you know, as he traveled and stuff. He was we were always off the beaten track. And so, you know, his idea of being a good steward to the land was do nothing, you know. And so we ended up moving out there and building our cabin and, you know, staying out. Well, and the idea was I would go back to school in the fall. Well, that got pushed back to about Thanksgiving or something like that. So we went back to the Bay Area and hung out, and, you know, I tried to go to school and whatnot, but by Easter it was sort of over, you know, it was just not really happening. But in the meantime, we had come up here with the school, a group from the school, to camp out on the property and whatnot. And I don't know how it happened. At that time, Maggie Carey was trying to build a school in Bryceland. And they had started a building across the road below Beginnings. It's on that big curve. And something happened. The foundation wasn't up to code or whatnot. I don't remember all the reasons that got shut down, but then the Beginnings thing started to come up and whatnot. But so some of the people from Bay High got all connected up with Maggie and stuff. So sometimes the kids from up here a couple times went to the Bay Area and hung out with like the people that were running Bay High and whatnot. And one of the teachers from Bay High actually ended up himself moving up here, Jeff Canope, and he, you know, his kids, I think one of his kids is still around or whatnot, and there was some interesting things that went on, you know, in those trips back and forth and whatnot that I don't know where that thread was going to go, but, you know, that was just sort of one of the connections that was made. And so then, and that was, like I say, that started about the spring of 1970, and I moved up here in the summer of 1970. And, like I said, went back, but it was by 1971, I was here permanently. And when we first moved into our valley, which is not in the Gulch proper, it's where the Whale Gulch school is. Actually, where the school is was part of our original piece of property. But then at some point, a few years later, there was problems with my dad and his partners, which had been lifelong friends for a long time, and they ended up splitting up the property. And my dad ended up selling some of the pieces out by the road. And we kept a large piece back in the valley. And we were the only ones there. And then in 71, some people had bought a piece of property that was landlocked between our property and where Sanctuary Forest is, kind of big red, you know, where they do, it's about a mile from Four Corners. I'm not sure, but we called it McNasty's because of the guy who owned it was not very friendly. And they were supposed to have access through that it was an old logging road. And the guy, Jerry Shields, was the caretaker at that time, and he just absolutely refused that access. So one of the other people in the Gulch said, well, you should go talk to these people. And so then our neighbors moved in, and they had a trail down the creek, actually. Everything went down in a wheelbarrow. It's about a third of a mile and stuff like that. So then, you know, here we sort of had our own little community going in the Gulch, in what's become called Whiskey Hill. Well, I ended up breaking up with the guy I had moved here with in, you know, early on, like 72, 73 or something like that. I was still pretty young, but my sister would come up off and on and stay with me. My parent, you know, she was having a hard time in Berkeley. My parents were having a hard time with her, and there was, you know, she actually ended up going out a lot. You know, she was real restless and whatnot, and she became, you know, run around with more of the kids out in Whitethorn and whatnot. I was at home playing, you know, homesteader and stuff like that. And so I didn't get out as much away from the Gulch and Whitethorn area until years later. We just lived, you know, just out there living, and it was great because the guy I had moved here with was his parents had been into organic gardening and farming heavily, you know, before it was a real chic thing, and so we had a great background for that. But we found out how difficult it was without, you know, a little capital to start yourself off with, or build a big barn, and you know, the terrain wasn't necessarily the best for all the things we wanted to do, and manpower and stuff like that.